So firstly, thank you, Aaron, for organising this. I think it's really great to have something like this because I know when I was applying like a while ago, I definitely think I would have benefited from having all of the community aspect that you guys are putting together. So I'm a medical student currently at Birmingham University. I'm in my third year, but obviously because it is a graduate course, my first year was like the equivalent of the first and second undergrad cohort. So things are a little bit different compared to last year. Especially because now that we're in placements, the style of learning is just so much better and so much more interactive to be able to be on the wards, despite all of the COVID shenanigans that we're all experiencing. So just a little bit on my background. So I studied biomedical science at the University of Newcastle, and that was from 2012 to 2015. And then when I finished my degree, I initially wanted to take kind of like a gap year to go and travel and just, get a part-time job and do all of that sort of stuff. And then I was hoping to go and study a PhD. So after I had my gap year, I decided to go and do a master's, and my master's was a research master's in cancer research. And basically, I just wanted to get a bit more of a flavor of what doing a PhD might be like, to see if I like it, if I don't, before making like a full commitment to doing the 3 or 4 years. And then once I started my master's, I got to work with a lot of oncologists, and the main supervisor who I had, who's still very much like a mentor to me today, she would always invite me to go to clinics with her, and we would see patients and we would ask them if they'd like to donate some tissue or whatever for our research. And having that kind of experience kind of made me think, oh, do you know what? It would be really great to be able to do medicine because it doesn't close off the door of research. You can still be a doctor and a clinician and see your patients while still participating in research. And it's becoming more and more prevalent now that a lot of clinicians are doing PhDs as well. So I think that kind of just opened the door for me. And 2 years later, and here we are.
Yeah, I mean your story is very, very unique in the fact you changed your mind not very suddenly, but it wasn't something that you always wanted to do. You found out whilst you was doing your research. Yeah, I mean, is there anything like, why did you want to study at Birmingham? What made you choose Birmingham over all the London universities, or like say Manchester, or say Warwick?
I mean, to be honest, that's a good question. The honest answer is that I was quite keen to do a graduate course, and I was never good at doing the UCAT exam. So that has always been my arch nemesis. And at the time when I was applying, I know some of the universities that didn't do UCAT did things like GAMSAT and BMAT. But at the time when I was applying, Birmingham, the graduate course, and Cambridge were the only two schools that didn't require an entrance exam. Now, for that reason, it did mean that, so for Cambridge, excuse me, I wasn't eligible to apply because their requirements for their A-levels were, I think you had to have an A in chemistry, even if you're applying as a graduate, and I didn't, I had a B. So through some weird, I guess, I don't know, cosmic coincidence, whatever you want to call it, Birmingham just happened to be the right university that matched all of my personal criteria. So I was very fortunate to have gotten a first in my undergrad, and that's something that they definitely looked at. And I think from my understanding, at the time that I was applying, because I know it's changed now, and I know that Birmingham does require a UCAT now. But at the time when I was applying, they had a lot of emphasis on extracurricular stuff, and they just basically, like, you needed to have ABB as your A levels, which is what I had. They wanted a first, and they wanted extracurricular activities. So in a weird way, I kind of just fell into it. But Birmingham is like one of the best universities, I guess, all round anyway.
Of course.
I'm a bit biased, obviously. Yeah. We take it with a pinch of salt. I probably would have said the same thing about like Newcastle when I was there. So yeah, for that reason, I don't know. I've been very happy with it so far, so that's where it's ended up. But I'm almost certain that wherever else I would have gone to, even if it's the London universities or whatever, I'm sure I would have said exactly the same. So
Yeah.
who knows?
Yeah, so just a bit of background. We as you probably well know, we've had Ollie and then Kenji on and
Yeah.
yourself today. So the aim of this discussion was just to gauge a lot of different backgrounds. So take for example Ollie, who came straight from a biomed degree and he went and studied medicine straight off the bat, and then Kenji, who is currently on an undergrad course,
Mhm.
but he's still excelled with that with that graduation.
Mhm.
So I'm just trying to gauge the different aspects of the course and different pathways you can get in. Like would you say there's anything unique you did to aid in your application?
I think in my like specific case, I think having done my master's was a help. Now I do kind of get asked this by students who say, like, I want to go and do medicine. Do I have to do a master to stand out? And the answer is a solid no. If you're not already interested in doing a master's, I wouldn't spend the time or the money. Because as obviously as demonstrated by Kenji and Ollie, who are both, very astute students, like you don't need to do a master's and you can still, as you said, excel. Um, but I think that was my unique selling point. That because I had some experience working in labs and working in quite like a multidisciplinary area, that's something that I got to speak about in my personal statement and just say this has basically been what has shaped my experience as to why I want to go into medicine. So that's what I would say for me personally. Um, but yeah, as you said, I don't think there is like a cookie cutter way that students can kind of pick up and apply.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's open to so it's it's a very open-ended question. You get such a diverse range of students applying, if that be mature or, for example, Ollie, who came straight out of doing his undergrad. It's not a one size fits all. You're very unique in that way. So as you said, Birmingham is very extracurricular driven. What sort of extracurricular activities did you do at that time?
Sure. So again, similar to Ollie and Kenji, I had my YouTube channel, which I'm still keeping up or trying to keep up
Yeah.
anyway. So that was one thing, and having a lot of I guess doing how would you word them? I suppose like science communication activities. I know during my undergraduate, I did a lot of mentoring, and that was basically going into schools in the area and trying to encourage students to go into higher education, encouraging students to consider STEM subjects, or obviously selling the biology in a medicine aspect that I was personally interested in. And also when I was working well, actually, it was when I was studying in London. I also did some work with some autistic children in a nearby local school, and also there was another school that was running sort of like after school science clubs. So again, I think it's something that's quite like a personal like passion project of mine anyway, to try and get younger students involved in science and medicine, especially because a lot of the schools that I was going to were from quite deprived areas. And obviously, since joining Birmingham, I've done a little bit of work in the widening participation societies. So again, I think that gave me a bit of a talking point. So that's what it was in terms of like, I guess, the more official extracurricular activities. In my personal statement, I did mention a couple of other things like, that I like to do art and all of that sort of stuff, just to, I guess, show a bit more personality.
Yeah,
But yeah, those were the general activities.
of course. So how do you just going back to obviously your prior education, because it's not a really talked about subject on how it's very much black and white. If you have these grades, then you can apply. So what was your background in terms of like A levels and obviously applying to undergrad universities?
Mhm. I mean, in terms of medicine and biomed and all of that goes, I was definitely just very much an average student.
Okay.
I know I meet a lot of, honestly, there are so many people I meet these days who are, I'm pretty sure, like geniuses of some sort. But for me, I was a very average student. So my A levels, I got A, B, B. I got an A in biology, a B in chemistry, and a B in maths. Um, and at the time of applying, I definitely wanted to do biomedical science. So I applied to, I think I applied to Newcastle, Durham, Manchester, and Manchester Met. And I applied to two different courses at Newcastle, but Newcastle was my first choice. And then in terms of other, I guess, academics, like I did get a first. It wasn't a massively high first, but it was
Yeah.
nonetheless. Um, and actually, like on that point, I would say to any of the students who are wanting to apply, as long as you pass over the threshold, I don't think universities rank you based on your actual, from my understanding anyway, I don't think they rank you, like if somebody got like 75 versus, I don't know, like 85%,
Yeah.
I don't think, from my understanding, that should make a difference, but correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, that's essentially, those were my, I guess, I don't know, grades, if you like. So nothing outstanding. It was just the average kind of things that you might need to go and study those sorts of courses.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the trend I've kind of gathered off doing these talks is that you don't need to be not academically minded, but you don't need to have, say, a 720 UCAT score. As you said, Kenji expressed he wasn't very good at the UCAT, same as Ollie. But now you look and they've progressed so far. They're on their way to graduation. So as you said, like how did you find that experience with obviously just applying in general? Obviously, you said that you didn't really favor the UCAT. So
Mhm.
did you feel that limited you in sort of way, and how did you overcome that?
Are you asking with UCAT specifically, or do you mean like generally?
Just in general, so like how did you obviously how did you overcome um not really applying to UCAT universities,
Mhm.
and what resources or like is there anything that benefited you within that?
Um, I mean, thinking back again, this is something I speak quite a lot about on my channel with the UK Cat. I understand the merit of it. I really do. It's not something I personally, I honestly couldn't say that I invested or like I exerted a lot of my own effort into it. So I will say so take my experience with a pinch of salt. I think there are like number of books and resources and stuff if you do want to go for the UCAT route. Um, but in terms of limitations, it certainly did. It certainly did limit my options of where I wanted to apply to. But I think applying, if you want to apply to graduate courses anyway, so like just the 4 year courses, you're a little bit limited as it is because I know not all schools offer the 4 year accelerated courses, so that's already a bit of an issue. Um, yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I do wake up some days and I just think, am I really here? Because I mean, like the chances for me were quite small, um, because like while like it would have been a lot easier for me to go down the PhD route because obviously, I am more um like academically inclined, not in the terms of grades necessarily, but in the sense that like I really enjoy the science and I enjoy like the mechanics of things and like research. So that is something that like I do enjoy quite a lot. Um, but yeah, I mean, this is what so something I personally think, and I don't know if anybody else would agree. Sometimes with medicine, it's just a case of finding the right school for you. And just because like you might not necessarily get into somewhere, it does like one place that you might have your heart set on, it doesn't mean that you need to rule medicine out necessarily.
Yeah.
Um, and like I've had experience of people who've like applied to a number of schools, they haven't gotten in, but then they've gotten into like Cambridge or Oxford just because maybe they were the right candidate for that school and not for other ones. If that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, each university has that the certain way of teaching. As you said, Oxford is very academically minded within medicine, but then you've got other universities like Warwick, for example, where you're hands-on from the first year. So I do understand it's very varied on what you, but then again, you're again very limited in which universities you want to apply for. How just going on a tangent, like how you obviously you have to be strategic with your applying to different universities. How did you find that was within obviously?
Again, like, this is the thing, like, I don't necessarily think I was strategic. I know when I speak, compared to a lot of the medical students that I speak to who are very, like, I guess, yeah, strategic is the way that you mentioned. I don't, for me, I didn't really think about it that way. For me, it was just like realistically, where can I get in? And like Birmingham was like the only way. So it wasn't something that I kind of thought, um, like, how can I increase my chances of here or there, or how can I tweak things here or there? It was, for me, was kind of like, this is what I've got. Like, these are my grades, these are my experiences. Let's just apply to universities that I meet the criteria of, and kind of just keep my fingers crossed and see what happens. So I know that's probably a little bit of like a rogue way of doing medicine, because I know a lot of people have this. And you know what? Perhaps I could have been a bit more that way. So maybe that's a bit more of criticism on myself. But I mean, here we are.
Yeah, I mean, of course you were successful, so it doesn't matter. It paid off.
Yeah.
In terms of the Birmingham application, how did you find? Was it MMI that you did for your
Yes.
interview? How did you find the MMI process at Birmingham?
Do you know what? Very enjoyable. I can't believe I'm saying this. I was very, very nervous all until like literally going in. But as soon as the process starts, it kind of just, it's a bit of a dance, to be honest. And I think if anybody's done any prep or anything, you kind of know that you go in and, you get given your scenarios or whatever. And assuming that you've done enough prep, the only thing you really have to manage is like just your nerves on the day. And I guess I was quite fortunate because I did have a lot of friends like Ollie and Kenji and a couple of my other friends who had given me that really valuable advice. And they said, just work on calming yourself, and then the rest of it, as long as you've read the books and done the practice and gone over the other stuff, just enjoy it. Because if the examiners can tell that you're calm and you're like having, I don't know, enjoying the interaction with the people who are interviewing you, then you should be okay. And yeah, I genuinely thought that my interview was quite a positive one. I did make a couple of mistakes on some stations, but I think that's the beauty of an MMI, is that every time you move to the next station, you kind of just switch over. So it was kind of like, oh, okay, and breathe. Like, let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, I feel a lot of successful candidates that we've spoken to have all said the same thing, that they really enjoyed it, and they just went with it, and that's what made them enjoy the experience. I think if you enjoy the experience, you don't seem as nervous, and then that really shows that you want to be there. You're enjoying being there instead of somebody that's crumbling under the pressure. If that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's completely understandable though. Like the nerves, like they really do get to you. I remember like as soon as I finished my interview, we were supposed to stay and have kind of like a walk around the campus just to get to know it better. And literally on autopilot, I just, like somebody who's been traumatized, just walked and kept walking and kept walking. And then I got on a train and then I started like then I was like, oh gosh, hang on, there was like so yeah, there's a bit of that thing of like I kind of just came out of the haze and was like, oh god, okay, that's over. I can kind of just go back to relaxing now.
So because you studied a biomed degree and now you're doing your undergrad in med, how do you find the two courses to compare? And obviously there's a lot of differences, but how would you say the similarities weigh up between the two?
Okay, so I definitely, like, something I can definitely say with the differences, I guess, to begin with, is that with medicine, there is a lot of information, but you don't necessarily need to go as deep into that information. But it is literally like an ocean, and there's just so much. And I'm not sure if you can ever be done learning medicine. But with biomed, it was like I felt that it was a bit different in the sense that like you would have specific things that you would focus on, but then you would really, really dive deep into those subjects, and you would get into pathways and specific proteins and specific molecules. So that's one of the biggest differences, and that is something that tripped me up a little bit, especially at the start of grad med, because a lot of people were learning general stuff and going through things quite quickly, whereas I'm like caught down some sort of rabbit hole of like going down a specific pathway or something. So that's one of the biggest differences. Some of the similarities is that I would say the pace of the work is similar. So in terms of the number of contact hours that you have and the general amount of work that you are expected to do, that's quite similar. A bit different in graduate med, obviously, because that is a bit more, like, especially the first year, sorry, because that's obviously accelerated. And let's try and think what else is there. And obviously, like, there is a lot of overlap with the content, but something that I noticed is that it does depend on where you did your undergraduate, because there are certain people who did biomed, but then they had a very, very strong anatomy background. Whereas at Newcastle, I felt like my focus was a lot more on like molecular stuff. So your weaknesses and your strengths kind of differ even within like a biomed course.
Yeah. When we've discussed it, I think people have expressed it gets progressively more physical rather than just sat in a classroom doing watching or doing lecture notes. Have you noticed progressing from your first to your second year now? It's getting more hands-on rather than academically.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. I think it's because I'm still kind of in that mindset of like comparing it to first year. But no, you're absolutely right. So even from first year, once a week we would go into GPs, and we would be able to sit in consultations, watch and see how the GPs interact with the patients. We would practice examinations. Sometimes we would do like being taught certain skills like taking blood or giving injections. So all of those things do go like hand in hand with the theory that you're learning. So yeah, that's one of the biggest differences. We had some of that in biomed, to be completely honest. Like we had some, like let's say you're learning about ECGs. I do remember doing ECGs in the lab, but we didn't really know what we were doing. To be like, it wasn't quite as focused.
Yeah, I think we discussed this with Ollie in depth. With biomedic, we explained it was more of you're learning the content and it's very linear. You look at a chart and it's either you diagnose a disease or you look at a graph and you can see the malignancy. But with medicine, it's more about the application. If you go to treat somebody but they're allergic to this treatment, then you have to find a different pathway to treat. It's very three-dimensional rather than a biomed degree. How would you say your degrees benefited you with studying medicine? Like, do you feel yourself as having like an advantage compared to all the other undergrads?
Yes and no. I mean, a lot of the undergrads who I've come across are like incredibly bright and incredibly hardworking. So it's not a parallel in that sense. But I do think it has given me, it's kind of, in a way, it might sound a little bit silly, but it's kind of given me that confidence of, I know that I've had difficult exams and I know that obviously they do differ between different courses, but it's kind of, given me a little bit more like confidence in the fact that I've developed certain study skills or picked up certain ways of like managing time and being able to juggle a lot of things. So in that sense, it's given me the advantage. But I think one difference I should say actually is that I think speaking to Ollie and Kenji, they're almost doctors now, which is incredible.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the experience that you're getting from me is from like a a student who's literally just entered the hospitals, and I'm only just starting to get comfortable talking to patients and navigating my way and doing that awkward thing of, "Oh, I'm really sorry, can I just like squeeze your abdomen for a second while I talk to my colleagues?" So like, I think I'm at that stage now. But I mean, some of the stuff that you were mentioning about, yeah, you have to think about different pathways and stuff. Perhaps having heard Ollie and Kenji speak, I can imagine that that's at the stage that they're at the moment. But in the off chance that anybody's listening and they might feel a bit intimidated of, oh gosh, that seems like a lot to do. Literally, my objective for this year is to learn how to take a good history from a patient. And all that requires really is to be able to walk up to patients, ask them if you can just get a story basically of why they're there, what treatments they're on, etc. And that's essentially the focus of my year this year. So a lot of the diagnosis and all of that sort of stuff, while you do pick some of it up at the moment, like at the very beginning of the stages where I am at now, a lot of that is focused in the later years. So yeah, I think that's a little slight jump that you get from third year to fourth and fifth.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of being able to speak to obviously yourself and a lot of different people in the different stages of their medical degree. If that be you, who's just on the cusp of starting it, compared to Kenji and Ali that are just finishing, and I think we've got a few doctors on in the coming weeks. So it's just trying to get, obviously, you will be a lot more familiar with the current system of applying compared to Ollie and Kenji. However, you also are on that learning experience as well, so you'll be able to express your feelings about the current situation when they would have already overcame those situations, really. In terms of, like, you said you had a lot of extracurriculars. How do you find managing them compared to obviously your previous undergrad compared to now? Has it gotten any better with the course load, or?
I mean, the short answer is no. But I also think it goes to do with your personality. So obviously, like, I know Kenji and Ollie quite well, and like, I hope Kenji doesn't mind me saying this. Like, Kenji is somebody who's very, very organized. He's very like he's a great student. He's very organized. He kind of timetables certain things in, and I think that's a great asset to have. I'm not 100% sure about Ollie, but I assume that he might be much the same. The way I work, I mean, for better or for worse, is I tend to compartmentalize things. So I may say that, okay, for the rest of my Saturday afternoon, all I'm going to do is just paint or make YouTube videos or read books or whatever. And then Sunday, I can say, well, all of my Sunday is going to be, I don't know, studying or whatever. And the way that I work is doing things in chunks. And I mean, the efficacy of that is, you can try out for yourself and see what works best for you.
Yeah.
But I know again, this might be kind of like a critical point, I guess. The most successful students that I've seen who do manage to keep things up are the ones who do a little bit of everything a day. That's not something I personally, it's not really it doesn't suit me very well, because if I've, like, let's say I've just got into a painting and I'm like doing some artwork, I find it very difficult to just be like, okay, so this is my half an hour for today done. Now I'm going to go and do something else for half an hour. I'd much rather invest like a great amount of time. So that's the way that I manage to keep my activities up, is to kind of just go, all right, this chunk of time is for this, and I'm not going to worry about anything else. And then this chunk of time is for that. And then, that's the way that I guess I try and keep things up. But it does definitely get tight. Time gets tight, and you kind of have to be like, do I need to have an hour lunch break, or can I have like a 10-minute lunch break and then, I don't know, like do something else in that time?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I didn't really get to ask Ollie and Kenji the questions regarding like how they're finding med school at the moment, like with coping with the actual course material, because obviously you said it's a vast amount, but you only scrape the surface. So from obviously coming from a biomed degree, and you excelled in that, is that something that's easy to adapt to, or is it something that's really foreign in that respect?
Can you bear with me like 2 seconds? I just need to plug my laptop in and I'll just
Yeah,
be
for
with you
sure.
shortly. Bear with me. Okay, we're back. Sorry, it's always a dangerous game when you're on like 60% and it's like, can you make it? So to answer your question, I would say, and yeah, so having a little think about it, yeah, I think the thing that helps you the most, not just with medicine, but with anything you do, is I guess the familiarity. And sorry, I'll just catch my breath. I'm on the third floor of this house, so I'm a bit flustered. Yeah, so it's like the more you hear something, or the more it becomes familiar to you, and the more that you can sort of make sense of it. So I remember like the first time we were learning about immunology, I hated it because there were so many different types of white cells. You've got your neutrophils and basophils and eosinophils, and they all do different things. They all have all of these like weird and wonderful receptors. But then through doing my master's and undergrad, now it's like one of my favorite topics. And like when you hear about like immune disorders and stuff in the hospital, I kind of just go, oh yeah, that's because of this, and it's because of this does this kind of thing. And I think medicine is a bit of like, it's like a second language. So I would say the more exposure you've had in whatever capacity, then it will be useful for you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the more exposure you have, how did you do any work experience to like gauge why you wanted to go and study medicine and ultimately to help your application?
Yes. So for the work experience, I did quite a bit of shadowing with the oncologist that I mentioned.
Okay.
But aside from working with her, I did also shadow some surgeons at a different hospital, and did also do some general like A&E clinics as well within like within some of the London hospitals, and that did kind of just give me more of an idea of actually, I think this would be the kind of job that I'd like to do at some point. So yeah.
Yeah. With obviously you've seen the type of successful med students on your course at the moment. What would you say is what would you say is the most valuable thing with obviously applying now? Because we've heard of Ken again going back to Kenji and Ollie, the stuff that was relevant back then, but from somebody speaking that's just gone through the application process, what would you deem the most important attributes are, for example, like experience that somebody need to be successful?
Okay. So I can kind of answer this in two parts. The first part is about like actual tangible practical things. And the other part, which I would say is arguably more important, is about like your general approach to things. So let's start with the practical things first. So from my experience, something that's very important is when you do work experience, try and do it for a lengthy amount of time. No, sorry, not shadowing and things like that, but if you are like volunteering somewhere, like working in a care home or things like that, try and do them for an adequate amount of time. And if you have done it as an adequate amount of time, just make sure you write in how much time you are putting in. Not just as kind of like bragging points, but it's kind of like shows commitment basically.
Yeah.
So I think that's very important. That was an advice that I received from a lot of people. The other thing I would say is when it comes to, for example, writing your personal statement, and I actually just recently like reviewed my own personal statement for a video that I was making, and when I was reading it back, I think a piece of advice that again I got, which I found to be quite useful, is literally in the first paragraph, you don't need to try and sound very like different or very, you don't need to have like a perfect, I guess, way of presenting yourself. Just be you. Like I know it might sound like that kind of cliche advice, but if you can just like literally summarize genuinely why you're doing medicine, people aren't going to question like why is this person, maybe these motives aren't quite as good as this other person's motives. So that's what I
Yeah.
would say in terms of personal statement. Um, The other thing, which I guess you mentioned earlier, is try and strategize in your own way, so that you don't end up wasting your time. And again, I say this from personal experience because I did end up wasting my time on quite a few occasions. When, for example, I didn't really need to apply to UCAT universities if I knew that I'm just not going to put in as much time or effort. So I guess a little bit of strategy. Listen to Ollie and Kenji on that one, I would say. And I'm just trying to think what other practical things that are quite useful. I'll come back to it if anything else comes. But I think one of the most important things is just to I don't know. Again, I'm sorry if it's just going to be a little bit cliche, but it's just that thing of having the perseverance.
Yeah.
And also, sometimes I think people make getting into medicine out to be some sort of huge milestone and a huge feat. But the thing is, a lot of people who have made it are people who've just sometimes managed to, as I said, find themselves in the right school for them. So if the more of that you can try and do, and just look at your strengths and see where it can fit in, then.
Yeah, I guess the common factor is, even though everybody's different within their experience, everybody has the same underlying qualities and skills of, as you say, perseverance, that they're all caring, that they all have the qualities of wanting to work in medicine, and that's obviously why they were successful. So I do completely agree that there is two sides of that. You can have as much work experience as you can have the most work experience, but if you don't have the qualities, that's going to show up in the interview. And unfortunately, you're there to become a doctor at the end of the day. I mean, if anybody's got any questions and who'd like to either type it in the chat or unmute their microphone. I think Uma's got a question. So I think he's asked, does your work experience have to be the year before you apply? Was that the case in? So if I understand correctly, I think that's the case of Warwick and other certain universities. But was that the same for Birmingham?
No. So I actually emailed some universities and asking about this specifically, and they said try and keep it in the last 3 to 4 years. Which, I mean, that's what Birmingham said to me. So I think there is that window of just a couple of years. But I think if you say that you did something, I don't know, 10 years ago when you were 12 and you helped out in a care home, then there might be a bit dubious about that. And actually, I don't know if this might be relevant for me to share just while we're on the subject, just while if anybody else has any questions. So when I was, I think, 15 or 16, I did consider doing medicine. But I did a bit of work experience and I kind of thought about it, and I was kind of put off. And I don't think I would have been ready to start doing that at 18. So I didn't actually apply to medicine. But I remember when I was 17, I had done a bit of work experience working with, just shadowing an anesthetist, and had done certain bit of work experience there. So I guess medicine was always a little bit in the back of my mind. So I guess it wasn't a complete switch. So I don't know if that's just worth mentioning. And I think that's why I asked that question of, how long ago does the work experience need to be? Because I thought, can I talk about this? But they said try to keep it relatively fresh.
Yeah, I mean, that would certainly that certainly would have shown in your character of you just explaining that even though you weren't, as you said, even though you weren't mature enough at that time, you've now come to terms of what you was thinking at that time, and you now want to progress into a career. I think going back to Kenji, he said the same thing. He he knew himself he wasn't mature enough at 18, but now he's excelling in that field anyway. I think from his words, it's if you're not ready to progress into medicine at that time, there's always going to be a space for you. But it's whenever you're ready. I mean, if anybody's got any other questions.
So I guess if you guys don't mind me asking, so are you all thinking about applying to graduate medicine?
So I think the aim of setting up this society was to support graduate entry medicine, people applying for graduate dentistry, and some physicians, assistants, mainly. I believe mainly first and second years on a biomed science course. That's what we've targeted it towards. However, it's something that we're trying to get this lecture series published as fast as possible. Obviously, not for people to decide, because then they need to decide, are they going to sit the UCAT, are they going to write their personal statement. And I think it's really good to have the knowledge of being able to say they spoke to yourself, medical students, doctors, and just not only that, having the outlook on what each person's gone through, how you differ to people that have gone through it 10 years ago, and how, for example, how you didn't favour the UCAT, but other people have excelled at getting in that way, and just trying to grab a whole load of people and just trying to bunch their experiences together for everybody.
Yes. Okay. If that's the case, then I guess perhaps if you have a couple of minutes after the questions at the end, maybe it might be more useful for people if I just share you a couple of, I guess, mistakes that I learned.
Sure.
Because I think that might be quite beneficial, just so you don't fall into the same traps. But I've just seen there's another question. So do universities still take into consideration your A levels if you apply to a grad med course? I think this depends. I saw something quite scary, and I can't remember which university it was. Perhaps it was, oh gosh, don't quote me. I might have to have a look and maybe email you later. But it was certain medical schools were saying that even as a graduate, they still expect you to have the same A levels as the undergraduates who are applying, which in my opinion is a bit unfair, because I think even at the time when I was doing my A levels, like A stars were just introduced. And since then, everything has kind of shifted upwards. So I think at the time when I had just finished my A levels, people were getting into medicine with AAB, whereas now, obviously, some schools are like 3 A stars or whatever, and that's like your requirement. So I think that is a bit unfair. And I can't, off the top of my head, remember which university. Some do, but not all of them. They consider your A levels, but perhaps not to the same level as the undergrads.
I certainly know from my research that Sheffield and Liverpool still expect you to get a minimum A level. Same with obviously the Oxbridge universities, but there's other universities out there. For example, I think it's Nottingham and obviously Warwick, who just disregard your A levels. I think they know that you've matured in that respect, and I think they realise that some students go on to do a degree because they didn't get the sufficient grades. So if they're putting a cap on graduates doing an undergrad degree, then I think they're missing the point for some of the students. But I do understand where Umar's coming from with that.
No, yeah, definitely. It is just a bit of a shame. So I definitely agree. But I mean, I know I've like spoken quite negatively about the UCAT so far, but if I'm going to be like perfectly honest, I would say that one of the biggest mistakes I made is just not taking into full consideration that, I mean, whether I like it or not, it is just part of the application. And I do often get messages from students saying like, oh, I didn't do that well in the UCAT. What can I do? And like my sympathy, like they have my full sympathy. But I would say, do as I say, not as I do, and maybe do try and be a little bit more strategic about it. And I'm sure that Ollie and Kenji would have spoken about a lot of those things. And I wouldn't necessarily say that what they had to say was outdated, to be honest, because I think they are only a year or so ahead of ahead of me, and I don't think things have changed necessarily a huge amount since then. Okay. So a piece of advice that I was told, I guess retrospectively, is that try and make a Excel document, and in there literally write everything that you have to offer. So all of your A levels, all of your work experience, and everything you have. And then make a list of everything that you need to do. So your UCAT, what grades you need, like, which schools, like what are the ranges for different schools, what experience you need, and just kind of do a cross comparison. And if that immediately rules out certain schools, doesn't matter, rule them out. Like if medicine is your ultimate goal, then don't be disheartened by the fact that you might not necessarily get to go to your dream school, because to be honest, you might end up intercalating there. You might end up doing a postgraduate degree there, like if you're really set on a place. But if your aim is just to get into medicine, then try and do a cross comparison and try and just see where your strengths, like which universities take on your strengths.
Yeah, I believe the UCAT has become unavailable at this point, unless you want to go and study at. Mm-hmm. I think only 3 graduate courses offer the BMAT, and that's Oxford and Cambridge. So it's
yeah. I mean, if you don't mind me asking, Aaron, like how do you or some of the people that you speak to on a regular basis, how do you guys feel about the UCAT or any of the admissions tests?
So personally, I feel the UCAT is, again, it's very aptitude based, but you can revise for it. Obviously, from reading through some of the books, the questions are repeatable and the questions are the same. However, the only caveat to that is hitting 700 on each one. Yeah. which is a difficult part, obviously, when you're trying to hit that high of a percentile and they just wipe everybody out beneath it. It becomes almost I like to describe it as a bottleneck of there's too many applications and they're just slicing all these potential great students because of their again, we were explaining this with Kenji. The advice he gave was he's currently studying an undergrad, but it's a 5-year undergrad. However, that's because he said his UCAT wasn't that great, but I feel like he shed a light on it being an opportunity to actually go and study, and he ran through the steps of how he's very organized, as he said, so he was able to work throughout his degree and was able to fund that in that case. But yeah, again, I think the UCAT's the main barrier. You can go and sit the GAMSAT, but then that only gives you a maximum of it realistically gives you a maximum of 3 options in terms of if you meet the extra requirements. So I think the UCAT is the main gate that you have to get past at this time.
I completely agree. Yeah, I do agree, and I can't agree with you more that it does unfortunately miss a lot of great candidates. I mean, the way that I've heard it described to me is the UCAT might select for the top scoring students, as in the students who might perform better on tests, but it doesn't necessarily select for good doctors. I mean, not that like you can't be a high scoring candidate and also be a good doctor, but that's just the way that the selection process works. And I do think it's a bit of a shame. I mean, as I said, like my complete sympathies, because I genuinely do think that Birmingham worked out perfectly for me in the sense that, so I am genuinely very sad that now that they've brought the UCAT in, because I think Birmingham, a lot of my colleagues, for example, who are on my course, they feel the same way, and they are some of the some of the brightest people I've ever met, like very high accomplished, very bright, but a lot of them say the same thing. A lot of them say that actually we struggled with UCAT. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know what that says about the system, but I think if it's a case of you're trying to get the 700s, then yeah, it's just strategizing and stuff. I wish I could be a bit more helpful, but
no, I totally agree. I mean, Ollie shed a light on. I think he got 690, and he explained he was one of the lowest candidates to actually get
me.
into.
Yeah, he said that.
And now he's really excelling with his papers that he's publishing. So just to back your statement up, it is true that even though you're really academically minded in getting a good UCAT score, it doesn't make you a good doctor or a good researcher and all the above, really.
Yeah. I mean, I do hope that everybody, I guess, finds their own way throughout this, though. But I don't know. It can be a bit tricky. I do appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, if nobody's got any other questions, do you have any way for people to contact you that you'd like to plug?
Not particularly. I mean, I've got my YouTube channel. If anybody wants to, I don't know, go and see if anything on there might be helpful to them, and that's just called Atousa. But other than that, like my details for Instagram or whatever, will just be in the video links.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, if nobody's got any other questions, then they know where to contact you if they've got any follow-ups.
Sure. Lovely. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, best of luck to all of you. Best of luck with everything. So.
Thank you for that, Atousa.
All right. Have a good evening then.
You too.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.